On June 12, 2025, the world awoke to the harrowing news of Air India Flight 171's crash just minutes after takeoff from Ahmedabad. Among the 242 people aboard the Boeing 787 Dreamliner bound for London Gatwick, only one man lived to tell the tale: 40-year-old Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, a British national of Indian origin. His survival is being called a miracle, but his account of the final moments before the crash offers a chilling and sobering insight into what those last minutes were like for the other passengers who didn't make it. Ramesh, seated in 11A by the emergency exit on the left wing, lived through the horror, the confusion, and ultimately, the catastrophic plunge of a plane that moments before had seemed to be flying normally. Now stabilized in a hospital, Ramesh has begun to recount the sequence of events that led up to the tragedy, a haunting narrative of turbulence, quiet fear, mechanical disarray, and unimaginable loss. According to Ramesh, the flight began without incident. The aircraft took off into the early morning sky with the usual vibrations and humming of jet engines that seasoned travelers grow accustomed to. The in-flight crew, composed of experienced Air India professionals, moved down the aisles checking seatbelts and safety equipment. Ramesh noticed nothing unusual until about 5 minutes after takeoff, when the first signs of something being wrong subtly appeared. The plane made an abrupt, slight bank to the left. At first, he thought it might have been weather-related, perhaps the tail end of monsoon turbulence. However, when the aircraft lurched more sharply to the right and then dropped altitude momentarily, a tense silence settled among passengers. Babies stopped crying, conversation ceased, and people looked at each other with growing unease. Ramesh remembers locking eyes with a flight attendant who passed by his row just moments before the sudden drop. He said her face bore an expression that betrayed more than confusion, it was fear. Seconds later, the plane shook violently. The overhead compartment sprang open, a few bags tumbled into the aisles. Oxygen masks did not deploy, something Ramesh found deeply troubling in hindsight. Alarms in the cockpit could be heard faintly through the wall separating the cabin and the flight deck. The crew moved with urgency, rushing to their seats and instructing passengers to fasten seatbelts and brace. The announcement came not from the captain, but from a junior crew member. It was shaky, almost whispered, "Please assume brace position. We are experiencing technical difficulties." Panic took over. Screams erupted as the aircraft pitched forward again. Ramesh describes a moment that felt suspended in time, a weightless freefall where gravity itself felt uncertain. He grasped the emergency exit handle beside him instinctively, though training and reason told him not to use it unless grounded. Then came what he calls the scream of metal, the sound of shearing, twisting force as the fuselage endured violent aerodynamic stress. The lights flickered and went dark. Somewhere from the back, a voice cried out prayers in Hindi. Another passenger, just behind Ramesh, clutched a pendant of Lord Hanuman and closed his eyes. Then silence, a breathless few seconds where everything stilled, and impact. The crash into the hostel building near the medical college came like a thunderclap. Ramesh remembers the explosion, a flash of fire, and the sense that his entire body had been thrown into a furnace. The emergency exit burst open from the force, likely saving his life. The left wing had disintegrated, along with most of the middle fuselage. He was flung outside, tumbling onto concrete and shards of burning debris. Miraculously, he had only minor injuries, a broken clavicle, several burns, and glass lacerations. He lost consciousness within seconds, but not before he caught a last image that would stay with him forever: the ruins of the aircraft engulfed in flames, and the eerie silence where once there had been life. Rescue teams arrived within minutes, although navigating the inferno was near impossible. By the time they found Ramesh amid rubble and twisted metal, his survival seemed impossible. He was transported to a nearby hospital and placed under intensive care. As news spread, global attention turned to the lone survivor. His story, now beginning to be told in fragments, paints a picture not just of survival, but of how mechanical failure or human error, still to be investigated, can unravel a flight system so quickly that even seasoned pilots are helpless. Authorities believe that the crash may have been caused by a sudden failure in one of the flight's hydraulic systems, which in turn affected the aircraft's pitch control. However, black box data is still being analyzed. Boeing and international regulators have launched independent probes. What remains chilling is that no distress call was issued from the cockpit, a fact that implies how fast the chain of failure unfolded. Ramesh's testimony supports this. He noted that the flight crew looked alarmed but overwhelmed, with no clear communication to passengers beyond the brief brace warning. Since regaining consciousness, Ramesh is asked repeatedly for updates on the other passengers, particularly a mother and daughter seated across the aisle from him. They had offered him a chocolate just before takeoff, part of a simple human interaction now weighted with tragic finality. He also asked about the flight attendants and described how one young stewardess stayed standing longer than anyone else, ushering people into brace position even as the plane spiraled downward. She had courage, he told doctors. She tried to help everyone. The crash has devastated hundreds of families, and the grief in both India and the UK is immense. Candlelight vigils have been held in London, Manchester, Mumbai, and Imphal, where one of the youngest crew members hailed from. Air India, under scrutiny, has grounded the remaining Dreamliners in its fleet pending further checks. Compensation and support are being organized for the families of victims. Still, nothing can bridge the chasm left by such a loss. For Vishwas Kumar Ramesh, survival is a mixed blessing. He speaks softly, cautiously, and with eyes that seem to drift to places no one else can see. Each time he closes them, the sound of tearing metal and the smell of smoke return. He knows he lived through something unexplainable. He doesn't claim heroism. He doesn't pretend to understand why he alone survived. But in his grief and disbelief, he offers the world a message that is part warning, part plea. We must never assume that technology makes us invincible. In the final seconds before death, he said, everything becomes incredibly human, raw, instinctual, fragile. What remains is a heartbeat, a memory, and in his case, the unbearable burden of being the one who tells the story.